Now, the target to inoculate two-thirds of the country's population in order to reach herd immunity, but does South Africa have the capacity to mobilise the existing resources to achieve this target? Joining me now to talk about this is Chairperson of Social Security Systems Administration and Management Studies at Wits University. That's Professor Alex van der Heever. Prof, a pleasure to have you on the program this evening. Now, you've said that government's ultimate plan to vaccinate a minimum of 67% of the population to reach this herd immunity by the end of the year is an overly ambitious target to meet. Talk to us through why you've raised this argument.
But I think that the logistics are quite incredible, and they do require considerable planning. And I think that part of the concern that a number of us have raised is that there hasn't really been the preparation put in place for us to reach that kind of target expeditiously. I think that we would have to do things quite differently than we've done in the past to be able to reach that target. And we also require that government moves very, very rapidly with bilateral agreements to give us access to a significant amount of vaccine doses this year. So I think there are a number of challenges. But I'll say one thing that I would rather that government were more ambitious, but rather than less ambitious, and be kind of held to an expeditious program in which you try and solve every problem that you can to ramp up a vaccine strategy on a rolling basis as we go forward. So I would say I would rather that we focus on getting to herd immunity as soon as possible. We eliminate those barriers. We don't focus on the fact that this was an aspirational goal and the Department of Health hasn't done its work yet. But I think that we all have to do that work now. It is absolutely critical that we get as many people vaccinated in 2021 as possible, even if the 2021 goal of the Minister of Health is potentially unrealistic given where things stand at the moment.
So the Health Minister, Dr. Zweli Mkhize, briefed the nation saying that they were in talks with several vaccine manufacturers and were at an advanced stage of negotiating a public-private partnership to make it all work, with the hope that some supplies would arrive by February. Why do you believe this feat cannot be achieved?
Well, so first of all, it's very unclear what negotiations and discussions have occurred to date. They aren't really public. I don't really buy the non-disclosure agreement argument. I think they really only started moving in the last 3 weeks. Now, whether or not we are going to get vaccines in February depends very much on how fast they are sitting on moving on the bilateral negotiations. What has become apparent in the last few days is that there is, in fact, a considerable willingness of a number of vaccine manufacturers to actually supply South Africa if we put our hand up. And what has not been happening in the last 6 months is that government has not been putting its hand up. So I think we're now going to see whether or not actually beginning to move forward will make a difference. But we do need vaccines as soon as possible. So I certainly hope that we do have vaccines in February, but I think that we will have to wait and see, because we are certainly starting with that objective while being on the back foot.
There's also been this growing criticism over government's response, with South Africans watching on as many other countries roll out mass immunization programs. What is the government not getting right, in your opinion?
Well, I think a lot of the countries that have been very proactive. I'll give one example. If you look at the Israeli Minister of Health today, said, well, we sat 7 months ago and said, we're a small country, small population. We're not going to be prioritized by large pharmaceutical manufacturers. And therefore, we need to look at a strategy that makes sure that we get a vaccine as soon as possible, and we need to start now. So the first thing was that they set their goals. They set realistic goals at that point. They entered into bilateral agreements and commitments to purchase vaccines when they were registered, and that they had prepared a rollout program which was going to start the moment those vaccines were registered. Plus, they didn't put all their eggs in one basket. They didn't focus on a single vaccine at that point. And so they had really a comprehensive strategy very, very early on. So they were ready to start running the moment we had the first trials produce reasonable results. Now, South Africa appears not to have done that. And I think that's the reason why we're sitting behind at this point. And we really do have to catch up fast now.
Right, before we wrap up, I also want us to touch a bit on comments made by other members of the Ministerial Advisory Committee. We heard from Barry Shoup, who said he believed that government was close to finalizing discussions with pharmaceutical companies to secure vaccines for South Africa. And he's also adamant that South Africa has not the only country which is lagging behind in terms of getting the vaccine. What's your assessment in this regard?
Yeah, so firstly, I think that we're definitely not the only country lagging behind, but we don't want to be one of the countries lagging behind. We want to be ahead. And so that's not really an argument to say that we're part of an incompetent bunch. I think that we definitely haven't done our job, but we can potentially do our job going forward. In terms of actual agreements going forward, I mean, we only have their word to go on. I think certainly from discussions that I've had, a lot of companies have just been waiting for government to do something. And they appear to have only just recently woken up. So I think that there are definitely bilateral discussions that are beginning now. I don't think that they were happening before. But they're happening now because a lot of pressure has been put on government to get its ducks in a row. So I would rather move on from this defensive approach of saying, oh, well, we're doing something to hide the fact that they haven't been doing something for a long period of time, and rather focus now on outcomes. What have you actually done? What are we delivering? When do we have a start date? Do we have a rollout plan? Have we got all the actors in place? Rather than, bullet lists of stuff we want to do.
All right. That was leading scientist Professor Alex van der Heever just talking to us over concerns raised, saying that he's not convinced that South Africa will be able to reach its target of inoculating and vaccinating about 67% of the population by the end of this year.